I could have killed you all by now, but I didn't, for I wanted to demonstrate my power to you and to all the earth. So you still think you are so great, do you, and defy my power, and refuse to let my people go? Well, tomorrow, about this time, I will send a hailstorm across the nation, such as there has never been since Egypt was founded. Quick, bring in your cattle from the fields, for every man and animal left out in the fields will die beneath the hail. Some of the Egyptians, terrified by this threat, brought their cattle and slaves in from the fields, but those who had no regard for the word of Jehovah left them out in the storm. Then Jehovah said to Moses, "Point your hand toward heaven, and cause the hail to fall throughout all Egypt, upon the people, animals, and trees." So Moses held out his hand, and the Lord sent thunder and hail and lightning. It was terrible beyond description. Never in all the history of Egypt had there been a storm like that. All Egypt lay in ruins. Everything left in the fields, men and animals alike, was killed, and the trees were shattered, and the crops were destroyed. The only spot in all Egypt without hail that day was the land of Goshen, where the people of Israel lived. Then Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron.
I finally see my fault. Jehovah is right, and I and my people have been wrong all along. Beg God to end this terrifying thunder and hail, and I will let you go at once.
All right. As soon as I have left the city, I will spread out my hands to the Lord, and the thunder and hail will stop. This will prove to you that the earth is controlled by Jehovah. But as for you and your officials, I know that even yet you will not obey him.
All the flax and barley were knocked down and destroyed, for the barley was ripe and the flax was in bloom. But the wheat and the emmer were not destroyed, for they were not yet out of the ground. So Moses left Pharaoh and went out of the city and lifted his hands to heaven, to the Lord, and the thunder and hail stopped, and the rain ceased pouring down. When Pharaoh saw this, he and his officials sinned yet more by their stubborn refusal to do what they had promised. So Pharaoh refused to let the people leave, just as the Lord had predicted to Moses.
Chapter 10.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go back again and make your demand upon Pharaoh. But I have hardened him and his officials so that I can do more miracles, demonstrating my power. What stories you can tell your children and grandchildren about the incredible things I am doing in Egypt. Tell them what fools I made of the Egyptians, and how I proved to you that I am Jehovah." So Moses and Aaron requested another audience with Pharaoh, and told him,
Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, asks, "How long will you refuse to submit to me? Let my people go so they can worship me. If you refuse, tomorrow I will cover the entire nation with a thick layer of locusts so that you won't even be able to see the ground, and they will finish destroying everything that escaped the hail. They will fill your palace and the homes of your officials and all the houses of Egypt. Never in the history of Egypt has there been a plague like this will be."
Then Moses stalked out. The court officials now came to Pharaoh and asked him,
Are you going to destroy us completely?
Don't you know even yet that all Egypt lies in ruins? Let the men go and serve Jehovah their God.
So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh.
All right, go and serve Jehovah your God. But just who is it you want to go?
"We will go with our sons and daughters, flocks and herds. We will take everything with us, for we must all join in the holy pilgrimage."
In the name of God, I will not let you take your little ones. I can see your plot. Never. You that are men, go and serve Jehovah, for that is what you asked for.
And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your hand over the land of Egypt, to bring locusts. They will cover the land and eat everything the hail has left." So Moses lifted his rod, and Jehovah caused an east wind to blow all that day and night. And when it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts. And the locusts covered the land of Egypt from border to border. It was the worst locust plague in all Egyptian history, and there will never again be another like it. For the locusts covered the face of the earth and blotted out the sun so that the land was darkened, and they ate every bit of vegetation the hail had left. There remained not one green thing, not a tree, not a plant, throughout all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh sent an urgent call for Moses and Aaron and said to them,
I confess my sin against Jehovah, your God, and against you. Forgive my sin, only this once, and beg Jehovah, your God, to take away this death. I promise not to refuse afterwards to let you go.
So Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord, and he sent a very strong west wind that blew the locusts out into the Red Sea, so that there remained not one locust in all the land of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people go. Then Jehovah said to Moses, Lift your hands to heaven, and darkness without a ray of light will descend upon the land of Egypt. So Moses did, and there was thick darkness over all the land for 3 days. During all that time the people scarcely moved, but all the people of Israel had light as usual. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and said,
Go and worship Jehovah, but let your flocks and herds stay here. You can even take your children with you.
No, we must take our flocks and herds for sacrifices and burnt offerings to Jehovah our God. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must have sacrifices for the Lord our God, and we do not know what he will choose until we get there.
So the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go.
Get out of here, and don't let me ever see you again. The day you do, you shall die.
Very well. I will never see you again.
Chapter 11.
Then the Lord said to Moses, I will send just one more disaster on Pharaoh and his land, and after that he will let you go. In fact, he will be so anxious to get rid of you that he will practically throw you out of the country. Tell all the men and women of Israel to prepare to ask their Egyptian neighbors for costly gold and silver jewelry. For God caused the Egyptians to be very favorable to the people of Israel, and Moses was a very great man in the land of Egypt, and was revered by Pharaoh's officials and the Egyptian people alike. Now Moses announced to Pharaoh,
Jehovah says, About midnight I will pass through Egypt, and all the oldest sons shall die in every family in Egypt, from the oldest child of Pharaoh, heir to his throne, to the oldest child of his lowliest slave, and even the firstborn of the animals. The wail of death will resound throughout the entire land of Egypt. Never before has there been such anguish, and it will never be again. But not a dog shall move his tongue against any of the people of Israel, nor shall any of their animals die. Then you will know that Jehovah makes a distinction between Egyptians and Israelis. All these officials of yours will come running to me, bowing low and begging, Please leave at once, and take all your people with you. Only then will I go.
Then, red-faced with anger, Moses stomped from the palace. The Lord had told Moses, Pharaoh won't listen, and this will give me the opportunity of doing mighty miracles to demonstrate my power. So although Moses and Aaron did these miracles right before Pharaoh's eyes, the Lord hardened his heart so that he wouldn't let the people leave the land.
Chapter 12.
Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, From now on, this month will be the first and most important month of the Jewish calendar. Annually, on the 10th day of this month, announce this to all the people of Israel. Each family shall get a lamb. Or, if a family is small, let it share the lamb with another small family in the neighborhood. Whether to share in this way depends on the size of the families. This animal shall be a year-old male, either a sheep or a goat, without any defects. On the evening of the 14th day of this month, all these lambs shall be killed, and their blood shall be placed on the 2 side frames of the door of every home, and on the panel above the door. Use the blood of the lamb eaten in that home. Everyone shall eat roast lamb that night, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The meat must not be eaten raw or boiled, but roasted, including the head, legs, heart, and liver. Don't eat any of it the next day. If all is not eaten that night, burn what is left. Eat it with your traveling clothes on, prepared for a long journey, wearing your walking shoes and carrying your walking sticks in your hands. Eat it hurriedly. This observance shall be called the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt tonight, and kill all the oldest sons and firstborn male animals in all the land of Egypt, and execute judgment upon all the gods of Egypt. For I am Jehovah. The blood you have placed on the doorposts will be proof that you obey me, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And I will not destroy your firstborn children when I smite the land of Egypt. You shall celebrate this event each year. This is a permanent law to remind you of this fatal night. The celebration shall last 7 days. For that entire period, you are to eat only bread made without yeast. Anyone who disobeys this rule at any time during the 7 days of the celebration shall be excommunicated from Israel. On the first day of the celebration, and again on the 7th day, there will be special religious services for the entire congregation, and no work of any kind may be done on those days except the preparation of food. This annual celebration with unleavened bread will cause you always to remember today as the day when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. So it is a law that you must celebrate this day annually, generation after generation. Only bread without yeast may be eaten from the evening of the 14th day of the month until the evening of the 21st day of the month. For these 7 days there must be no trace of yeast in your homes. During that time, anyone who eats anything that has yeast in it shall be excommunicated from the congregation of Israel. These same rules apply to foreigners who are living among you just as much as to those born in the land. Again, I repeat, during those days you must not eat anything made with yeast. Serve only yeastless bread. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them,
Go and get lambs from your flocks, a lamb for one or more families, depending upon the number of persons in the families, and kill the lambs, so that God will pass over you and not destroy you. Drain the lamb's blood into a basin, and then take a cluster of hyssop branches and dip them into the lamb's blood, and strike the hyssop against the lintel above the door and against the 2 side panels, so that there will be blood upon them, and none of you shall go outside all night. For Jehovah will pass through the land and kill the Egyptians. But when he sees the blood upon the panel at the top of the door and on the 2 side pieces, he will pass over that home and not permit the destroyer to enter and kill your firstborn. And remember, this is a permanent law for you and your posterity. And when you come into the land that the Lord will give you, just as he promised, and when you are celebrating the Passover, and your children ask, What does all this mean? What is this ceremony about? You will reply, It is the celebration of Jehovah's passing over us. For he passed over the homes of the people of Israel, though he killed the Egyptians. He passed over our houses and did not come in to destroy us.
And all the people bowed their heads and worshipped. So the people of Israel did as Moses and Aaron had commanded, and that night, at midnight, Jehovah killed all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt, from Pharaoh's oldest son to the oldest son of the captive in the dungeon, also all the firstborn of the cattle. Then Pharaoh and his officials and all the people of Egypt got up in the night, and there was bitter crying throughout all the land of Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and said,
Leave us, please. Go away, all of you. Go and serve Jehovah, as you said. Take your flocks and herds and be gone. And don't give me a blessing as you go.
And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people of Israel to get them out of the land as quickly as possible, for they said,
We are as good as dead.
The Israelis took with them their bread dough without yeast, and bound their kneading troughs into their spare clothes, and carried them on their shoulders. And the people of Israel did as Moses said, and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold, jewelry, and for clothing. And the Lord gave the Israelis favor with the Egyptians, so that they gave them whatever they wanted, and the Egyptians were practically stripped of everything they owned. That night the people of Israel left Rameses and started for Succoth. There were 600,000 of them, besides all the women and children going on foot. People of various sorts went with them, and there were flocks and herds, a vast exodus of cattle. When they stopped to eat, they baked bread from the yeastless dough they had brought along. It was yeastless because the people were pushed out of Egypt and didn't have time to wait for bread to rise to take with them on the trip. The sons of Jacob and their descendants had lived in Egypt 430 years, and it was on the last day of the 430th year that all of Jehovah's people left the land. This night was selected by the Lord to bring his people out from the land of Egypt, so the same night was selected as the date of the annual celebration of God's deliverance. Then Jehovah said to Moses and Aaron, "These are the rules concerning the observance of the Passover. No foreigners shall eat the lamb, but any slave who has been purchased may eat it if he has been circumcised. A hired servant or a visiting foreigner may not eat of it. You shall, all of you who eat each lamb, eat it together in one house, and not carry it outside, and you shall not break any of its bones. All the congregation of Israel shall observe this memorial at the same time. As to foreigners, if they are living with you and want to observe the Passover with you, let all the males be circumcised, and then they may come and celebrate with you. Then they shall be just as though they had been born among you. But no uncircumcised person shall ever eat the lamb. The same law applies to those born in Israel and to foreigners living among you." So the people of Israel followed all of Jehovah's instructions to Moses and Aaron. That very day, the Lord brought out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt, wave after wave of them crossing the border.
Chapter 13.
The Lord instructed Moses, "Dedicate to me all of the firstborn sons of Israel, and every firstborn male animal. They are mine." Then Moses said to the people,
"This is a day to remember forever, the day of leaving Egypt and your slavery. For the Lord has brought you out with mighty miracles. Now remember, during the annual celebration of this event, you are to use no yeast. Don't even have any in your homes. Mark this day of your exodus at the end of March each year, when Jehovah brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he promised your fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. For 7 days you shall eat only bread without yeast, and there must be no yeast in your homes or anywhere within the borders of your land. Then on the 7th day a great feast to the Lord shall be held. During those celebration days each year, you must explain to your children why you are celebrating. It is a celebration of what the Lord did for you when you left Egypt. This annual memorial week will brand you as his own unique people, just as though he had branded his mark of ownership upon your hands or your forehead. So celebrate the event annually in late March. And remember, when the Lord brings you into the land he promised to your ancestors long ago, where the Canaanites are now living, all firstborn sons and firstborn male animals belong to the Lord, and you shall give them to him. A firstborn donkey may be purchased back from the Lord in exchange for a lamb or baby goat. But if you decide not to trade, the donkey shall be killed. However, you must buy back your firstborn sons. And in the future, when your children ask you, "What is this all about?" you shall tell them, "With mighty miracles, Jehovah brought us out of Egypt from our slavery. Pharaoh wouldn't let us go. So Jehovah killed all the firstborn males throughout the land of Egypt, both of men and animals. That is why we now give all the firstborn males to the Lord, except that all the eldest sons are always bought back. Again I say, this celebration shall identify you as God's people, just as much as if his brand of ownership were placed upon your foreheads. It is a reminder that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with great power."
So at last, Pharaoh let the people go. God did not lead them through the land of the Philistines, although that was the most direct route from Egypt to the Promised Land. The reason was that God felt the people might become discouraged by having to fight their way through, even though they had left Egypt armed. He thought they might return to Egypt. Instead, God led them along a route through the Red Sea wilderness. Moses took the bones of Joseph with them, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel vow before God that they would take his bones with them when God led them out of Egypt, as he was sure God would. Leaving Succoth, they camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. The Lord guided them by a pillar of cloud during the daytime and by a pillar of fire at night, so they could travel either by day or night. The cloud and fire were never out of sight.
Chapter 14.
Jehovah now instructed Moses, "Tell the people to turn toward Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon, and to camp there along the shore. For Pharaoh will think, those Israelites are trapped now between the desert and the sea, and once again I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. I have planned this to gain great honor and glory over Pharaoh and all his armies, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." So they camped where they were told. When word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelis were not planning to return to Egypt after 3 days, but to keep on going, Pharaoh and his staff became bold again.
What is this we have done? Letting all these slaves get away?
They asked. So Pharaoh led the chase in his chariot, followed by the pick of Egypt's chariot corps, 600 chariots in all, and other chariots driven by Egyptian officers. He pursued the people of Israel, for they had taken much of the wealth of Egypt with them. Pharaoh's entire cavalry, horses, chariots, and charioteers, was used in the chase, and the Egyptian army overtook the people of Israel as they were camped beside the shore near Pi-hahiroth, across from Baal-zephon. As the Egyptian army approached, the people of Israel saw them far in the distance, speeding after them, and they were terribly frightened and cried out to the Lord to help them. And they turned against Moses, whining,
"Have you brought us out here to die in the desert because there were not enough graves for us in Egypt? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Isn't this what we told you while we were slaves, to leave us alone? We said it would be better to be slaves to the Egyptians than dead in the wilderness."
But Moses told the people,
Don't be afraid. Just stand where you are and watch, and you will see the wonderful way the Lord will rescue you today. The Egyptians you are looking at, you will never see them again. The Lord will fight for you, and you won't need to lift a finger.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Quit praying and get the people moving. Forward, march. Use your rod, hold it out over the water, and the sea will open up a path before you, and all the people of Israel shall walk through on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will go in after you, and you will see the honor I will get in defeating Pharaoh and all his armies, chariots, and horsemen. And all Egypt shall know that I am Jehovah." Then the angel of God, who was leading the people of Israel, moved the cloud around behind them, and it stood between the people of Israel and the Egyptians. And that night, as it changed to a pillar of fire, it gave darkness to the Egyptians, but light to the people of Israel, so the Egyptians couldn't find the Israelis. Meanwhile, Moses stretched his rod over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the sea with walls of water on each side, and a strong east wind blew all that night, drying the sea bottom. So the people of Israel walked through the sea on dry ground. Then the Egyptians followed them between the walls of water along the bottom of the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. But in the early morning, Jehovah looked down from the cloud of fire upon the array of Egyptians and began to harass them. Their chariot wheels began coming off, so that their chariots scraped along the dry ground.
"Let's get out of here. Jehovah's fighting for them and against us."
When all the Israelites were on the other side, the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand again over the sea, so that the waters will come back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses did, and the sea returned to normal beneath the morning light. The Egyptians tried to flee, but the Lord drowned them in the sea. The water covered the path and the chariots and horsemen. And of all the army of Pharaoh that chased after Israel through the sea, not one remained alive. The people of Israel had walked through on dry land, and the waters had been walled up on either side of them. Thus Jehovah saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And the people of Israel saw the Egyptians dead, washed up on the seashore. When the people of Israel saw the mighty miracle the Lord had done for them against the Egyptians, they were afraid and revered the Lord, and believed in him and in his servant Moses.
Chapter 15.
Then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord.
I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has thrown both horse and rider into the sea. The Lord is my strength, my song, and my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. He is my father's God. I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. Yes, Jehovah is his name. He has overthrown Pharaoh's chariots and armies, drowning them in the sea. The famous Egyptian captains are dead beneath the waves. The water covers them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, is glorious in power. It dashes the enemy to pieces. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrew all those who rose against you. You sent forth your anger, and it consumed them as fire consumes straw. At the blast of your breath, the waters divided. They stood as solid walls to hold the seas apart. The enemy said, I will chase after them, catch up with them, destroy them. I will cut them apart with my sword and divide the captured booty. But God blew with his wind, and the sea covered them. They sank as lead in the mighty waters. Who else is like the Lord among the gods? Who is glorious in holiness like him? Who is so awesome in splendor, a wonder-working God? You reached out your hand, and the earth swallowed them. You have led the people you redeemed, but in your loving kindness you have guided them wonderfully to your holy land. The nations heard what happened, and they trembled. Fear has gripped the people of Philistia. The leaders of Edom are appalled. The mighty men of Moab tremble. All the people of Canaan melt with fear. Terror and dread have overcome them. Oh, Lord, because of your great power, they won't attack us. Your people whom you purchased will pass by them in safety. You will bring them in and plant them on your mountain, your own homeland, Lord, the sanctuary you made for them to live in. Jehovah shall reign forever and forever. The horses of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his chariots tried to follow through the sea, but the Lord let down the walls of water on them, while the people of Israel walked through on dry land.
Then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel and led the women in dances. And Miriam sang this song.
Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider have been drowned in the sea.
Then Moses led the people of Israel on from the Red Sea, and they moved out into the wilderness of Shur, and were there 3 days without water. Arriving at Merah, they couldn't drink the water because it was bitter. That is why the place was called Merah, meaning bitter. Then the people turned against Moses.
Must we die of thirst?
They demanded. Moses pleaded with the Lord to help them, and the Lord showed him a tree to throw into the water, and the water became sweet. It was there at Merah that the Lord laid before them the following conditions to test their commitment to him. If you will listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and obey it, and do what is right, then I will not make you suffer the diseases I send on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there beside the springs.
Chapter 16.
Now they left Elim and journeyed on into the Sin wilderness, between Elim and Mount Sinai, arriving there on the 15th day of the 2nd month after leaving Egypt. There, too, the people spoke bitterly against Moses and Aaron.
Oh, that we were back in Egypt, and that the Lord had killed us there. For there we had plenty to eat. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to kill us with starvation.
Then the Lord said to Moses, Look, I am going to rain down food from heaven for them. Everyone can go out each day and gather as much food as he needs. And I will test them in this to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. Tell them to gather twice as much as usual on the 6th day of each week. Then Moses and Aaron called a meeting of all the people of Israel and told them,
This evening you will realize that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt.
In the morning you will see more of his glory, for he has heard your complaints against him. For you aren't really complaining against us. Who are we?
The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread in the morning. Come now before Jehovah and hear his reply to your complaints.
So Aaron called them together. And suddenly, out toward the wilderness, from within the guiding cloud, there appeared the awesome glory of Jehovah. And Jehovah said to Moses, I have heard their complaints. Tell them in the evening you will have meat, and in the morning you will be stuffed with bread, and you shall know that I am Jehovah your God. That evening vast numbers of quail arrived and covered the camp. And in the morning the desert all around the camp was wet with dew, and when the dew disappeared later in the morning, it left tiny flakes of something as small as hoarfrost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they asked each other,
What is it?
And Moses told them,
It is the food Jehovah has given you to eat. Jehovah has said for everyone to gather as much as is needed for his household, about 3 quarts for each person in his home.
So the people of Israel went out and gathered it. And when they poured it into a 3-quart measure, there was just enough for everyone, 3 quarts apiece. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered little had no lack. Each home had just enough. And Moses told them,
Don't leave it overnight.
But of course some of them wouldn't listen, and left it until morning. And when they looked, it was full of maggots, and had a terrible odor. And Moses was very angry with them. So they gathered the food morning by morning, each home according to its need. And when the sun became hot upon the ground, the food melted and disappeared. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much as usual, 6 quarts instead of 3. Then the leaders of the people came and asked Moses why this had been commanded them. And he told them,
Because the Lord has appointed tomorrow as a day of seriousness and rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord, when we must refrain from doing our daily tasks. So cook as much as you want to today, and keep what is left overnight.
And the next morning the food was wholesome and good, without maggots or odor. Moses said,
This is your food for today. For today is the Sabbath to Jehovah, and there will be no food on the ground today. Gather the food for 6 days, but the 7th is a Sabbath, and there will be none there for you on that day.
But some of the people went out anyway to gather food, even though it was the Sabbath. But there wasn't any. How long will these people refuse to obey, the Lord asked Moses. Don't they realize that I am giving them twice as much on the 6th day, so that there will be enough for 2 days? For the Lord has given you the 7th day as a day of Sabbath rest. Stay in your tents, and don't go out to pick up food from the ground that day. So the people rested on the 7th day. And the food became known as manna, meaning, what is it? It was white, like coriander seed, and flat, and tasted like honey bread. Then Moses gave them this further instruction from the Lord. They were to take 3 quarts of it to be kept as a museum specimen forever, so that later generations could see the bread the Lord had fed them with in the wilderness, when he brought them from Egypt. Moses told Aaron to get a container and put 3 quarts of manna in it, and to keep it in a sacred place from generation to generation. Aaron did this, just as the Lord had instructed Moses, and eventually it was kept in the ark in the tabernacle. So the people of Israel ate the manna 40 years, until they arrived in the land of Canaan, where there were crops to eat. The omer, the container used to measure the manna, held about 3 quarts. It is approximately 1/10 of a bushel.
Chapter 17.
Now, at God's command, the people of Israel left the Sin Desert, going by easy stages to Rephidim. But upon arrival, there was no water. So once more the people growled and complained to Moses.
Give us water!
Quiet! Are you trying to test God's patience with you?
But tormented by thirst, they cried out,
Why did you ever take us out of Egypt? Why did you bring us here to die, with our children and cattle too?
Then Moses pleaded with Jehovah.
What shall I do? For they are almost ready to stone me.
Then Jehovah said to Moses, Take the elders of Israel with you and lead the people out to Mount Horeb. I will meet you there at the rock. Strike it with your rod, the same one you struck the Nile with, and water will come pouring out, enough for everyone. Moses did as he was told, and the water gushed out. Moses named the place Massah, meaning tempting Jehovah to slay us. And sometimes they referred to it as Meribah, meaning argument and strife. For it was there that the people of Israel argued against God and tempted him to slay them by saying,
Is Jehovah going to take care of us or not?
But now the warriors of Amalek came to fight against the people of Israel at Rephidim. Moses instructed Joshua to issue a call to arms to the Israelites to fight the army of Amalek.
Tomorrow, I will stand at the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand.
So Joshua and his men went out to fight the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. And as long as Moses held up the rod in his hands, Israel was winning. But whenever he rested his arms at his sides, the soldiers of Amalek were winning. Moses' arms finally became too tired to hold up the rod any longer. So Aaron and Hur rolled a stone for him to sit on, and they stood on each side holding up his hands until sunset. As a result, Joshua and his troops crushed the army of Amalek, putting them to the sword. Then the Lord instructed Moses, "Write this into a permanent record, to be remembered forever, and announce to Joshua that I will utterly blot out every trace of Amalek." Moses built an altar there and called it Jehovah Nissi, meaning Jehovah is my flag.
Raise the banner of the Lord, for the Lord will be at war with Amalek generation after generation.
Chapter 18.
Word soon reached Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, the priest of Midian, about all the wonderful things God had done for his people and for Moses, and how the Lord had brought them out of Egypt. Then Jethro took Moses' wife Zipporah to him, for he had sent her home, along with Moses' 2 sons, Gershom, meaning foreigner, for Moses said when he was born,
I have been wandering in a foreign land.
And Eleazar, meaning God is my help, for Moses said at his birth,
The God of my fathers was my helper, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh.
They arrived while Moses and the people were camped at Mount Sinai.
Jethro, your father-in-law, has come to visit you,
Moses was told.
and he has brought your wife and your 2 sons.
Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and greeted him warmly. They asked about each other's health, and then went into Moses' tent to talk further. Moses related to his father-in-law all that had been happening, and what the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians in order to deliver Israel, and all the problems there had been along the way, and how the Lord had delivered his people from all of them. Jethro was very happy about everything the Lord had done for Israel, and about his bringing them out of Egypt.
"Bless the Lord,"
Jethro said.
"for he has saved you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and has rescued Israel. I know now that the Lord is greater than any other god, because he delivered his people from the proud and cruel Egyptians."
Jethro offered sacrifices to God, and afterwards Aaron and the leaders of Israel came to meet Jethro, and they all ate the sacrificial meal together before the Lord. The next day Moses sat, as usual, to hear the people's complaints against each other, from morning to evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw how much time this was taking, he said,
"Why are you trying to do all this alone, with people standing here all day long to get your help?"
Well, because the people come to me with their disputes to ask for God's decisions. I am their judge, deciding who is right and who is wrong and instructing them in God's ways. I apply the laws of God to their particular disputes.
"It's not right. You're going to wear yourself out. And if you do, what will happen to the people? Moses, this job is too heavy a burden for you to try to handle all by yourself. Now listen, and let me give you a word of advice, and God will bless you. Be these people's lawyer, their representative before God, bringing him their questions to decide. You will tell them his decisions, teaching them God's laws, and showing them the principles of godly living. Find some capable, godly, honest men who hate bribes, and appoint them as judges. 1 judge for each 1,000 people. He, in turn, will have 10 judges under him, each in charge of 100. And under each of them will be 2 judges, each responsible for the affairs of 50 people. And each of these will have 5 judges beneath him, each counseling 10 persons. Let these men be responsible to serve the people with justice at all times. Anything that is too important or complicated can be brought to you. But the smaller matters they can take care of themselves. That way it will be easier for you because you will share the burden with them. If you follow this advice, and if the Lord agrees, you will be able to endure the pressures, and there will be peace and harmony in the camp.
Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice and followed this suggestion. He chose able men from all over Israel and made them judges over the people, thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They were constantly available to administer justice. They brought the hard cases to Moses, but judged the smaller matters themselves. Soon afterwards, Moses let his father-in-law return to his own land.
Chapter 19.
The Israelis arrived in the Sinai Peninsula 3 months after the night of their departure from Egypt. After breaking camp at Rephidim, they came to the base of Mount Sinai and set up camp there. Moses climbed the rugged mountain to meet with God. And from somewhere in the mountain, God called to him and said, "Give these instructions to the people of Israel. Tell them, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I brought you to myself as though on eagle's wings. Now if you will obey me, and keep your part of my contract with you, you shall be my own little flock from among all the nations of the earth. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be a kingdom of priests to God, a holy nation." Moses returned from the mountain and called together the leaders of the people and told them what the Lord had said. They all responded in unison.
"We will certainly do everything he asks of us."
Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. Then he said to Moses, "I am going to come to you in the form of a dark cloud, so that the people themselves can hear me when I talk with you, and then they will always believe you. Go down now and see that the people are ready for my visit. Sanctify them today and tomorrow, and have them wash their clothes. Then, the day after tomorrow, I will come down upon Mount Sinai as all the people watch. Set boundary lines the people may not pass, and tell them, 'Beware, do not go up into the mountain, or even touch its boundaries. Whoever does shall die. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot to death with arrows, whether man or animal. Stay away from the mountain entirely until you hear a ram's horn sounding one long blast. Then gather at the foot of the mountain.' So Moses went down to the people and sanctified them, and they washed their clothing. He told them,
'Get ready for God's appearance 2 days from now, and do not have sexual intercourse with your wives.'
On the morning of the 3rd day, there was a terrific thunder and lightning storm, and a huge cloud came down upon the mountain. And there was a long, loud blast, as from a ram's horn, and all the people trembled. Moses led them out from the camp to meet God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. All Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because Jehovah descended upon it in the form of fire. The smoke billowed into the sky as from a furnace, and the whole mountain shook with a violent earthquake. As the trumpet blast grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God thundered his reply. So the Lord came down upon the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses up to the top of the mountain. And Moses ascended to God. But the Lord told Moses, "Go back down and warn the people not to cross the boundaries. They must not come up here to try to see God, for they will die. Even the priests on duty must sanctify themselves, lest Jehovah destroy them."
"But the people won't come up into the mountain. You told them not to. You told me to set boundaries around the mountain and to declare it off limits because it is reserved for God."
But Jehovah said, "Go on down and bring Aaron back with you, and don't let the priests and the people break across the boundaries or try to come up here, or I will destroy them." So Moses went down to the people and told them what God had said.